Everyone, and welcome to part 3 of my build of Dragon Stug Ausf C/D in 172 scale. Since the last episode of this build, the two layers of varnish have been applied. This is the varnish that I use. As you can see, it's matte varnish. Some people like to use gloss because it enables the pin washes to go further. I don't actually really do a great deal of pin washes. I usually paint in the seam lines, etc. So I prefer matte varnish because the oils don't spread as much and you have a bit more control. But it's personal choice, it's entirely up to you. So now that those two have dried, what I did was to start the process of what I like to do, which is to whiten everything up as much as I possibly can, and then once it's all white, then I'll bring it back down with the earth tones and the dirt effects. So once all the matte was dry, I added a white filter, white oil filter. I make my own ones, quite simple really. If you just put well, there we go. In this particular case it was Winsor Newton's soft mixing white. Just put a little bit on the side of a cup with some thinners in the bottom. I use an art thinner called Zest, which smells of oranges, and that beats the smell of turps in the model room, so I use that. I've had no issues with it whatsoever. And then just apply, like I say, a little bit of the oil paint on the side of the cup, a bit of your thinner at the bottom, and then just keep mixing it in until you feel that you've got the right consistency. For a filter, you want it fairly, as you can see there, a bit like dirty water really. And that was then applied over everything that had winter whitewash, including the wheels and obviously the main body. Don't worry too much about how you apply it. It doesn't have to be thinly put on because most of it will evaporate. The ideal is to try and get it into the recesses, but the overall aim of the filter is to blend all of the work that you've done together, and to just add another layer of white to the model itself. So while that's all drying, what we'll do is move on to the pigments. Now, with this particular model, what we're going to aim to do is to build up the pigments on this side, under the fenders, on the back, this side again, and then on the front of the Stug itself. Also, we have the tracks. These will all need to be pigmented out as well. So quite a lot of pigment work to be done. It's not something that you can do in a day because obviously with drying times. However, if you do want to speed up the process, you can always use a hairdryer to get things dry. But in my walk of life, I just do a little bit each day and then come back to the bench the following day, and it's all dried in nicely. So let's spend a little bit of time looking at pigments. I've got quite a range of pigments, spot on pigments here, which are very good, very pleased with those. AK, another good make, Vallejo as well, and a couple of others. I've got about 15 altogether, and from those, depending on whereabouts the model is based, for example Vietnam, then there'll be a bit of red mud in there, but primarily it's European theatre, and what I like to do is to make up 3 pots, and each one has probably 3 or 4 different shades of pigment. So in that case that's the light one obviously, this one is the medium colour, and then this one being the dark. As you can see, there's bits of foliage in there and everything, just to add a bit of coarseness to it. And then it's just a matter of the application, which I'll run through with you now. Now this is the first time I've done this on camera, so we'll see how well we get on. I personally like to build from dark to light, so getting the dark colour and using an old brush. Don't be shy with applying the pigments. The more you put on, the better, and it's just a matter of putting some dark pigments along the base like so. Just tapping the brush and letting the pigments fall loosely. There we go. And then we'll put some around the front of the sprocket there. Now, I don't know if you can see that clearly on the camera. Let me just do a close-up so you can see. There are a few gaps there, and that's what you don't want. So what we'll do is go over that again to fill in the gaps, because basically when you put the pigment fixer on, the pigments themselves do shrink back quite a lot. So we want to make sure that there's good coverage on all of those particular areas. Remember, you don't have to do it all first time around. If once you've done this process and you're not happy with it, once it's all dried in, there's nothing stopping you from putting a further layer on. So that's the dark pigments, so now we'll move on to the lighter shades. As you can see, I've placed the actual model on a towel, because what you want to do is, gravity is your friend in this process, so you want to make sure that whatever area it is that you're applying the pigments to is on a horizontal plane. Now what this does mean though, however, is once I've done this side, I've got to wait for it to dry a little while, or if you want to use a hairdryer, and then once it's dry enough for you to move the model, then you can turn it over and do the other side. So there we go. That's the middle shade. Okay, so let's add on the lighter pigments now. And try and get that right up against the back of the fender there. Again, just little gentle taps all the way along. Even though I'm doing it at arm's length, I can still see that we're getting a very good coverage here. So very happy indeed with that. So that's that done. What I do have is some white pigments, which we'll obviously use for the snow, but that won't come until later. So what we now need to do is to fix this all in place. Several things that you can put the pigments in place with. You can use thinners. I use watered down varnishes when I do the dust work on the upper hull later in the weathering process. But for the actual pigments on the side of the hull, or anything to do with mud work, I use MIG's pigment fixer. It's quite an aggressive fixer, so that's the reason why you have to put the coats of varnish on before you start doing any of these processes. And it's a matter of just using a pipette, drawing up the fixer. Now the golden rule here is not to touch the fixer, or try and touch it as little as possible. Just drop a little bit of fixer on, and then you have to be patient. Let the fixer work its way around, fixing the pigments in. And what you don't want to do is to create a large wash of pigments, because that will wash everything away. What you also don't want to do is to drop the pigment fixer from a height, because the weight of the droplet of pigment will create a bare patch. So it really is a matter of being very careful and just going around very gently, drop at a time. Just leave it a few seconds for it to spread out. Capillary action, I think, is the word for it. And then we'll add another one in, and just a matter of doing that all the way along until the whole lot's covered. So with all the pigment fixer in place, as soon as you've done it, I've mixed up a patch of pigments there. Now these have been blended in, all three, the light, the medium and the dark, and then it's just a matter of making sure there is as much powder as possible on the brush. And then from a height, I don't know how well that's coming out, but you'll see a cloud of dust coming down, and that's just really to provide one final layer while it's drying. And there we go, it's as simple as that. And then, like I say, for me now, my session at the bench is now finished, so this will just dry now until I'm ready to come back to the bench tomorrow. But if you've got spare time in your hands, then feel free to use the hairdryer to dry it all out, and then start the process, obviously by turning it over and doing the other side of the hull. Once that's done, then lay it flat, and then you can do the underside of the fenders, and then it's a matter of propping it up to be able to do the top half, the front of the Stug, and then to turn that around, and then to do the back end as well. So I shall crack on and get that all done, and once finished I'll show you the results. So the initial pigment work has all been completed, and I've been very pleased indeed with the results. What I wanted to do is just to add a little bit of extra finesse to it by adding some snow. This is done in a slightly different manner. This is what I have just actually done before I turn the camera on. The way to do it this way is to actually add the pigment fixer on first. Then it's very important to make sure that the powder or the pigment that you use is made to its finest as possible, and I do that by rubbing it down on a piece of paper and then picking it up with the brush, then again as normal flicking it onto the surface. Now you'll see that most of it disappears and you think, oh, that hasn't worked. Just be patient, because once it dries, this is how it will dry out. And as you can see on the back there, a very good result with all the white pigment there, showing the effects of the snow coming up on the back. Now I've cleaned off the exhausts because they were obviously got covered in the pigment. It's just a matter of using thinner because they obviously need some more oil work, but they will be dirtied up later in the process. Now I've done the front as well, and just really to highlight the ease of how you can use these pigments. On the left hand side there you can see quite an accumulation of snow, which was intentional, but it's a little bit too much. So just with a damp brush with a bit of thinner on, you can just very gently start wiping some of that off until you're happy with the actual finish. And then when that's done, just very carefully add a last bit of fixer in there, and that will be that done. So we'll wait for that all to dry, and then we can start on the oil work. So welcome to the world of oil paints. I use these to create shadows and light on the model, along with layering to create some neat effects. The traditional way to do your oil work would be to do your pin washes, then clean that up, do your shading and lighting work, wait for that to dry, then do your streaks, wait for that all to dry, and then obviously you would finish off with your dust and mud pigment work. Now the way I do it is that I'll do it by panel, so gradually working my way around the model, doing all the washes, the filters, the streaking, the mud and dust effects, etc. as I go. The easy reason why that is because in the busy life that I have, if somebody knocks at the door, then it's quite easy just to put the model down, leave it, walk away, and then come back again at a later date and know exactly where I am and what I'm actually doing. Now effective oil work is getting the consistency of the oil correct, dependent on the effect that you want to create. This is done through the use of thinners. There's hundreds of thinners on the market. As already mentioned, I use the artist one, which is called Zest. And what that enables you to do is to either put the oil on neat or put it on like a thin filter or wash. But you must always remember that the oil does go a long way, so you really do not need to use a great deal at all. Now for the application, I use a couple of round brushes. These ones here, one will be dry, one will be moist with the thinner. The blue, I've painted that one blue so that I remember as I'm working. Also a couple of streaking brushes to create different effects with the oils themselves, and then finally a blending brush, which again can create some nice effects. Now for this model, I will use a variety of oil colours and also different makes of oil paint. Try and stick with the more well-renowned ones like Winsor and Newton. If you buy the cheapy Harry 10 for £1 down at the art shop, they won't work as well. If you're just starting out using oils, I'd say there's three main ones that you should get. Raw umber, which is basically dirt in the tube. Burnt sienna, which is great for rust work and tools and wooden barrels on the guns, etc. And also burnt umber, which will be ideal for sort of doing your dark pin washes. So those would be the three main ones that you would need to have in your arsenal. For this particular model, for obvious reasons, I'm going to be using whites, so I've got 3 shades of whites there. Got a Georgian oil there along with the Winsor & Newtons. If you're doing anything with Panzer Grau, this is always a must, which is Payne's Grey. Black, I hate using black because it can get everywhere and can really ruin the look of your model, so you have to be very careful when using black. This is warm sepia. This is ideal for sort of engine oil and sort of wet effects, etc. Produces a lovely oily look. And Van Dyke Brown, which is sort of a darker version of the for your pin washes, etc. And then we'll also look at layering, where you layer different layers of mud and dirt, etc. And these are the 3 for this model that I'll be using, which is earth, light mud and dark mud. So that's all the oils. Once you've decided on the oils that you want to use, get yourself a little bit of corrugated card. I did this one a couple of days ago. The reason for using the card is, as you can see here on the corner, the linseed oil has bled out, and basically it dries the oil paint, and what that means is that it speeds up the drying process on the model as well. For this model, I'll actually have a whole palette. There we go, whole palette of paints that I'll use, and then obviously I can do mixing on the cardboard as well. I'll just try and get this in shot. You'll also notice that I've put the initials of the colours because I work quite quickly, and it's easier then to know what each shade is. So that's the tools and the oils in place. So let's start painting. Okay, this is going to be rather difficult to video, so we'll have a go and see how we get on. I've set it at the different angle so you can just basically see how I'll just dance around the model with the oils. I'll try and give as much commentary as I possibly can, and we'll just let the video roll and see what happens. So first of all, before I do anything, I just wanted to add a filter onto the back of the exhausts, so we can get a nice rust effect there. So we'll be using the burnt sienna for that. So we'll just moisten the brush. As you can see, I've got 2 little containers here for the thinner, one for cleaning off the dirty brushes, and one which is obviously clean for moistening. So we'll bring some sienna over and get that so it's a nice type of filter stroke wash, and we'll just apply that to the rear. And that's now giving that a nice reddish finish rust effect. Now we want to do is just to highlight the exhaust details. We'll use some of the warm sepia for that, make it into a bit of a wash. That's all very nice. And then we'll add a bit of dirt around the exhaust stack, so we'll get some more umber for that. That's nice, some nice shadows there. And then what we'll do, we'll get the blending brush and we'll just blend all of that in. Have to be very careful when you're doing your blending not to take off all that nice work that you've done. Don't know how well that will come out. I shall do some stills later, but you've got a lot better red effect now on the exhaust. So that's that done. Cleaning off the brush. Next I'll move on to the tools. The way I like to do my tools is to add a nice dark brown, so that would be a bit of Van Dyke brown. Not quite a wash. Want a little bit of consistency in there, and I'll just do the fine details on that. If you remember, the tools were painted in a light brown colour, and this obviously now darkens them considerably. It's a little bit too thick, so we'll add a bit more on. And that's better, like that. And onto the shovel handle. Add a bit more onto that. Now I'll just leave that for a few moments just to dry in a little bit, and then we'll do some more work on that. So while that's progressing, we'll now work on with the whites. Basically, when I do a whitewash model, I try to make it as white as I possibly can, and then bring it back down with darker tones. So what I'm aiming to do here is to sort of just mainly shading work, a bit of streaks, and just really just to add a bit of detail on the model there. So let's start with some of the whites that we have here, and we'll go along the front. That's a little bit too thin. We'll go along the front here on the first panel. And then what we'll do, we'll get the blending brush and we'll just drag that back. There we go. I don't know how well you can see that just above the gun tight, how that's being pulled back. Okay, and we'll just improve that a little bit. So it's a little bit on the thick side. and then we'll do again on the next panel. So just dab it on and then get your brush, blending brush, and drag it back, and on the other panel. Alright, and I should just work my way through the panels and do these. Just try another shade of white in there as well, just to break it up a little bit. Oh, that's nice, like that, that's good. Okay, so that's the roof done. And then we'll work on to more of the downward sides on the vertical panels, and again try and get some of those streaks going. Try not to play around with the paint too much. Once you've got the effect that you want, move on quickly. So it can be, you can keep wanting to try and create an effect that you're never going to get hold of. So once you like something, just do it and move on. Okay, I'm conscious this is all very boring for you, so leave this with me and I'll show you the end results. Okay, so all the white work's been done. I haven't left it to dry or anything like that at all. I'll be moving on now and doing the rest of the work. I've done some stills, but hopefully there you can see how those white areas have been intensified. You've now got sort of 2 or 3 shades of white in there. The streaks that I did, I went back and did some more on top, so there's a variation there as well. I don't know how well you can see at the front, we have some streaks coming down the front as well. So all in all, very pleased indeed with the way that's gone. I've just added a burnt sienna wash to the tools, so that's coming along very well indeed. Once that's dry, we'll finish that off with some dirt effects. So what I'm going to do now, just to finish off, is just to show you how I would do a whole panel. So we're going to start and just do the front. So again, let's moisten up the brush, and we want to get some dirt in there. So we'll use some, I shall use some Van Dyke Brown. Rather than do an actual wash and have thinners all over your model, what you want to try and do is to actually paint the actual line in itself. Needs a bit of a steady hand. So I'll do all of these. That's fine, and then we'll blend that in. Like that, that's come out well. Now there may be a little bit of oil that's come down, worked its way down the front, so just a few little some warm sepia, and we'll drag that down. Now all of a sudden those very white markings are now becoming darker again. So it's all about bringing it up light and then reducing it all back down again. So let's get some more of the Van Dyke Brown down in the corners and the recesses. Blending that all in. Similarly with the lights at the top, I don't want that to be as dark, so we'll go for some raw umber. That's all very good. Some more. So just add it, blend it, add it, blend it, add it, blend it. And we get some nice tones coming up there. So that's good. Don't have to do a great deal. So that's that main part done. Now what I'll do is just to show you how we do a little bit of layering with the dirt. It's just a matter of having a bit of fun with some splashes, really. If you get yourself your craft knife, it's all down to consistency of the oil. Depends on what sort of splash effects you'll get. Let's start with the dark earth and just put it onto your blade like so. That's quite thick, so hopefully we'll get some. Let's just add a little bit of thinner. You obviously can't see this, but I can see this going on quite nicely, and we have some nice solid effects there. Again, I'll do some stills, but you might just be able to see that. Anything you don't like, it's very simple. Just clean off your brush and just put a little dab on it, and that reduces it down. Okay, so that's the dark earth. Let's light it up now with a bit of dark mud. And then we'll finish off with some light mud. And just try and keep it within the realms of the pigments that you've already put on there. And then finally we'll enhance it all with a couple of shades of white. And there we go. Simple as that. So that's your first panel done. Just to give you an idea of some of the processes involved. Obviously I'll do some stills. I've had enough now, so I'm going to nip down and have some dinner, and then I'll come back and just carry on working my way around the Stug, doing panel by panel. Okay, so the oil work on the Stug is now complete. Very pleased indeed with the way it's gone, and I've very much captured the look that I was after, which is that faded winter camouflage with very muddy stains and dirt and grime all round. What it really needs to be done now is to finish off all of the extra bits and bobs, all the stowage, and that will then be added on, and then I can start doing any touch-ups and doing some final looks. Okay, so we're pretty much there now. There's a few issues around the shininess of the rubber tracks, so a little bit more pigment work to be done on that. But really that's pretty well much it now. We'll now move on to the figures and put those on as well, and then we'll decide which is the best way forward, whether to leave it as is or to put the figures on. So that's it for part 3, and I'll look forward to meeting you in part 4, where we'll go through the figures and the final build.